how do you actually practice in terms of, do you actually look at how you earn your money, or do you look at more of how you spend your money in terms of CR? That's the first question. And if so, whichever, then how do you actually make that part of your DNA to reflect commitment from the top? Because you talk a lot about your DNA, what exactly do you do in terms of CR governance? Do you have like a committee that looks into the issues of CR? Do you actually report? Do you have a scorecard? Do you actually have social audits and stuff like that?
I think that I mean, if you want to look at it in terms of whether you're earning it or spending it, you know, in that perspective, I think there's a combination of both. I would like to think there's a combination of both. I think where it relates to areas like governance and things like that, you know, I don't think it's money that is spent, because basically, like, let's say monies that you put in making sure you have a framework for quality control and making sure your products are probably acceptable to the market and the consumers. Those things I don't think are monies just being spent. You know, I think effectively they actually earn you a much better return. Where somebody will say that you're spending money is when they say that you know, this Dato Katie is spending a lot of money on rugby. You know, is where somebody, I mean, you can see it that it's discretionary spending, in the sense that you're trying to do something which probably is close to your heart rather than close to the heart of the corporation. You know, so in some sense, people will turn it around and say that it's a personal agenda than a corporate agenda. Although one would want to look at it as in a bigger environment. I mean, the bigger picture. So for companies like us, although we are we are doing a lot of piecemeal things, slowly getting things together. I think that yes, there is some level of what do you call interpretation, or whatever we want to say, that we are actually spending money when you should be actually earning money. But I think that in the broader sense of it, I think there is a lot of things that are going into actually enlarging your earnings picture, which will actually allow you to do a lot more.
Aaron, please.
I'll take the bull by the horns. It's about how you earn it and how you spend it. I think I won't recap what I said before. To us, it's definitely about how you earn it. As a bank, we have to make sure that what we're doing is sustainable, and therefore all of our credit principles are directed towards making sure that plantations, forestry, oil, waterways, you name it, we try to make sure that we have something to say that makes sure we stay on the straight and narrow across everything, even down to selling techniques, you know, making sure we sell things properly. So it is how we earn it. Now, how we spend it, it depends what you mean. If you're talking about how we spend it in terms of purchasing power of electricity, if you're talking about that kind of thing, then we are very keen to ensure that our direct impact, i.e. our footprint within society, is correct. And so within my KPIs, within my performance appraisal, I have actually got a target on waste. I've got target on inputs, outputs. They're all there. They're absolutely measurable. And I'm going to do the sort of corporate advert now, but not because I'm actually doing an advert. We've now got to the point where we do our sustainability report, and in there are measurements. I'm happy to show it to you. There are measurements that say this is where we're aiming to be carbon neutral by a particular date in time. And of course, because you can't just say that, you have to give each CEO that objective. Otherwise, by the time you add it up at the top of the organization, you haven't moved forward. So the second part of your question was, you know, yes, it's about earning it. Yes, it's about spending it. The second part of your question was, how do you get it into the DNA? Well, because we've been around for a long time, we have understood that it isn't just a question of great activities, although they're very, very important. And what we find is that if you ask employees what really turns them on, I mean, obviously you've got to pay them fairly and so on, so nobody ever answers the question in the employee survey that they're paid too much and work too little. It tends to be the other way around. But that is a hygiene factor. You must make sure that's correct. But if you ask them what really turns them on, it's development opportunities, the leadership that they work for, and generally speaking, what the company stands for. Okay? And that's becoming more and more important with employees, what actually they stand for. And if you ask them what they do in their spare time, they're talented, they put their effort into all sorts of local charities, and really sometimes it's just a question of harnessing that. So I'm not in any way belittling the efforts of the individuals in our organisation. But what we've discovered is that you need to institutionalise some of the processes to make sure it keeps going. So our public affairs department here in Malaysia is responsible for making sure that all of our efforts are pulled together and that it's on our intranet, that it's also out in anything that we can help with in the communities. We focus everything under an HSBC Cares banner, not because we want to sound fantastic, but because it's then easy for us to explain what we're doing. We are into education, we're into the arts, we're into sport. We have different programs underneath that. We actually believe in going into the disadvantaged areas because we believe that we have a lot of money, people have a lot of money these days, and you make much more impact and create much more benefit for the future if you focus in there. We have a department in head office called Group Sustainability, and they chase you on a regular basis if you get something wrong. They ask me on a regular basis what's happening with the RSPO. They come and talk at conferences. They make sure that you understand what your responsibilities are. And their role now goes beyond just the environment and dealing with the NGOs and trying to forge relationships. It actually goes into measuring our carbon footprint. So what we've discovered is, and this is because we are a huge worldwide organisation, that what you have to do is you have to harness the processes you would normally use to get your business done. You have to harness those processes to actually get this done as well.
Thank you very much. Irene, institutionalizing and sort of branding the corporate responsibility effort under a particular internally branded network, something we find that very useful as well, to pull it all together and to keep it focused. That area of focus and impact that Tan Sri Hasman also mentioned is very key to this effort. So, any other questions? Oh, sorry, gentleman down here with dark jacket.
Hi, Andrew from PwC. I'm in the Sustainability Business Solutions team. Just staying on the topic of suppliers, I think it's a very interesting subject, especially for Malaysia. Obviously, as corporate leaders who are leading companies more at the top of the food chain, how do you balance out your desire to work with those suppliers and to work with like ethical suppliers with the readiness of those companies in Malaysia? Because obviously your companies are very kind of strong around the corporate responsibility space, but if you look at all the suppliers out there in Malaysia, many of those are not ready, let's say, for this whole corporate responsibility push, and it's part of the evolution of those companies. So how do you manage that sort of balancing act between what your desires are to work with companies who are green, who are ethical, with the actual availability of those companies in Malaysia?
The answer is that every different community in which you do business, and by that I mean it can be a country, or it can be just a local community, or it can just be a new business partner. Everybody is at a different level of development and understanding on this, and the worst thing that you can do as a big corporate is to come in and boss everybody around. So you can't just come in and say, this is what I want, and if you don't do it, you can't do business with me. This goes with the corporate responsibility message. It is then up to you, us, in HSBC's case, to persuade, to have conversations with. I'm refraining from saying educate because that's patronizing, but inform. Explain why it is you behave as you behave, and hope that by making that connection you can bring everybody along together. But you're absolutely right, different places and different people are at different stages of understanding, commitment, and indeed ability. And I also think, I agree with Tan Sri, there is a limit to this. Obviously we get requests all the time. You can't take on the responsibilities of the world, so you have to understand the impact you can make and try and help other people understand what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, and the not just supply chain, I think. And, in fact, if the word CR actually means, people, profits, and planets, then the procurement lever is actually a very big one, certainly in the GLC space, and I presume in many other spaces, is that you use it to make sure there's ethical practices. So that means, talking about leakages and corruption, etc. I think we hold a torch, we try to keep it up. Frankly, our country needs to evolve and needs to do better in this space, as you know. And certainly the GLC space is something, the big ones, we estimate that every year 20 of the largest GLCs spend 50 billion ringgit. So you can imagine the numbers are huge. And we think we've set a target, Prime Minister set a target a few years ago to cut 20%. And if I could just give an anecdote that he invited me once to his house, not to feed me, but to show me, Azman, this was a few years ago, of how Shell Sarawak actually. Shell Sarawak, a multinational, no doubt, but Shell Sarawak is in the upstream side. How they do procurement, including electronic bidding. But I think the thing to note is that Shell Sarawak is, being in the upstream, uses Petronas's production sharing contract, by virtue of the law and by virtue of practice. So the standards applied in there, I think they save costs to the tune of about 26%, if I recall, by year 3. It was like 9%, 15%, and then 26% per annum. And this is cumulative and recurring. Number 2, they've actually developed a supplier base who are regionally and globally competitive, about 2,000 companies. And out of that 2,000, this is over a period of time. They've been doing it over many years, no doubt. Out of that 2,600 were Bumiputra companies, actually. Petronas has also been doing this. And in the process, and especially in an industry like oil and gas, I think they've instituted a lot of standards on environmental standards and so on. Tenaga similarly does many of these things. Telecom does many of these things, and UEM does many of these things. Some of our larger companies, Malaysia Airlines. Among banks, and certainly in their lending policies, ethics and so on is certainly in there. The overall, as I mentioned, we have not reached the standard of major multinationals at the head like HSBC, but certainly aspirationally this is where we want to go. On the subject of institutionalization, ST, your earlier question, just to mention briefly, our attempt, and indeed this is mandatory guidelines for our companies, are the Silver Book. Very briefly, it starts with an audit. You have to go in and really audit your current contributions and try to see and put it all together, bring it all together, number 1. Number 2, then you're supposed to come up, there's about 8 steps, very, very precise, unapologetically pedantic, actually. We really need to drill down at the start and go up and do this. One of it is actually the measurement. The net economic impact is a must. We do a matrix and say, okay, and then we have to tie into basically your business. If you are a bank, for example, you open rural branches, that ties in your business. And the final point, really, I think the thinking around the globe, from what I can see, is also moving towards that. The blurring between all these major estates, if you like, the government, the corporations, the NGOs, and indeed other parts of the supply chain, they're all getting a bit blurred, which is a good thing because it implies collaboration. So you hear of terms like social business, for example, which was maybe not around. Mr. Gates, before he stepped down from Microsoft, talked about creative capitalism or something like that. Not creative, I can't remember, it's a community capitalism or something like that, words to that effect. But on the ground concepts, I think increasingly those solutions are coming up. And I think this is part and parcel of the DNA of the modern corporation, and has to be.